Cape Independence is a movement advocating for the Western Cape to secede from South Africa and form an independent country. Supporters argue that the province, which consistently votes against the ANC, has a stronger economy, better governance, and would benefit from self-rule. However, critics point out that secession is unconstitutional, economically impractical, and could deepen national divisions. The Cape Independence Advocacy Group, CIAG, and other parties push for a referendum, but the idea currently lacks widespread support. While the movement continues to gain attention, legal and political obstacles make independence unlikely in the near future.
Good evening, Clement. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening.
Why are you trying to get the US to intervene in South Africa's internal affairs?
Well, so in the first instance, we're not particularly trying to get the US to intervene in affairs. We are lobbying internationally, just as the ANC itself lobbied internationally when it had the differences with the apartheid government. And fundamentally, we're an organisation that's existed for a number of years. We are fighting for something that is constitutionally permissible, it's legal, and it's something that will improve the lives of the Western Cape people significantly. And ultimately, we've been advocating for Cape independence for a number of time. We've engaged with many of the political organisations, including the presidency, including the Western Cape Premier. So this isn't something that's new. We want to have a referendum held in the Western Cape to allow the people of the Western Cape themselves to decide democratically, would they like to break away from South Africa? Is that the solution that they collectively want? Or do they want to remain in South Africa? And we have to understand the backdrop of that is since 1994, the majority of Western Cape voters have never once voted for the ANC, and they've never once been governed at a national level by the government they voted for. So what does Cape Independence deliver? It's not some scheme that's behind the scenes. It's really simple. The people of the Western Cape are not being governed by the party they vote for, and Cape Independence would allow them to be governed by the party they vote for. And I think that should be understandable for anybody in a democracy.
Yeah, and I really think, Phil, there's fundamental differences between the ANC that negotiates with other countries during a time when there's apartheid in this country, and an organization like yourself that's trying to appeal to the conscience or the influence of other countries outside when there is no necessarily persecution. Apartheid was different times. Of course it required that the ANC speak to countries outside.
Well, of course, these things are all very, very subjective. Now, apartheid was worse by a degree, but here we are in the Western Cape. The majority of us are ethnic minorities. We're discriminated against by government legislation. We're suffering chronic unemployment. We have, our lives are getting worse. We're getting poorer. So actually, this isn't something we should just write off because the ANC isn't quite as sinister as the National Party. I happily concede that, but the South African national government has performed absolutely terribly, abysmally, and people are suffering hugely. And we want to find solutions. We want to find democratic solutions. So we don't have to be absolutely as bad as apartheid to say, well, look, hang on a second, there's a problem here, and we're perfectly entitled. And actually, I'll just correct you on something. You said we haven't asked the President and the Premier and the Minister for a referendum in 7 days. What we've said to them is we want to go overseas. We believe we're constitutionally entitled to do so. But actually, out of fairness and transparency, we're writing to you to say, if you want to suggest that we're not within our legal rights, you've got 7 days to say so. And tellingly, none of them have, because we're not outside of our rights. We're perfectly entitled to go and do this in a democracy.
Okay, so I'm glad you realize that the comparison is quite flawed between what the ANC did during apartheid and what you're doing now. You've just mentioned now that you are facing chronic unemployment. What numbers do you have that we don't have? Because my understanding, having looked at Stats SA, is that unemployment is more rife among the black population and not among the white population. Even if I can take 50,000 white people in the Western Cape against 50,000 black people there, the numbers will tell that specific story. Do you want to share with us the numbers that demonstrate that chronic unemployment amongst white people in the Western Cape?
Well, look, so first of all, and I think this is a really good example of the problems in South Africa, you've instantly gone to black and white. This has got absolutely nothing to do with black and white. I'm talking about the Western Cape people. The Western Cape people, the largest group are coloured, the second largest group are black, and the smallest group are white. So you're making the assumption that we're fighting for Cape independence for white people, but we absolutely aren't. I authored the Western Cape People's Bill, which very clearly talks about those three racial groups all collectively making up the Western Cape people as established in the Western Cape Constitution. And what do we have in the Western Cape? We've got an unemployment rate of 20%. Now, that's half the rate in South Africa, which is a feather in the cap of the Western Cape, but more than double the G20 average. So here we are in a situation where the Western Cape, 1 in 5 people at the Western Cape are needlessly unemployed as a result of government policy for a government that the people of the Western Cape have voted against for 30 years. This is surely understandable. And actually, why do we always have to go to race? That's exactly the issue. Isn't South Africa supposed to be a non-racial country? That is one of the things that we're fighting for. We want a non-racial country, and it's all right for the president to talk about, hang on a second, we want non-racialism, but actually we've got more race laws now than at any time during apartheid.
So sorry, Craig, are you saying that the Western Cape has the highest levels of unemployment? The last I checked, we were looking at, I think, Eastern Cape, the Northwest. Is that the numbers that you have, that the Western Cape actually has the highest levels of unemployment?
No, that's not what I said at all. I said South Africa has got 40%, just over 40%, he's 41.6 at the expanded rate, and the Western Cape's at 20. What I said is that the Western Cape is half of South Africa's number because it's better governed, but it's double the average of G20. In other words, it's good, but it's better than the rest of South Africa, but it's still absolutely terrible by any international measure, and that's a result of national government economic policy. Okay, so the Western Cape doesn't have chronic unemployment compared to other provinces in South Africa? Well, it's got chronic unemployment. 20% absolutely is compared to other provinces. The other provinces are worse. Okay, cool. But hear me, it's got chronic unemployment. Yeah, so, but when you say we've got chronic unemployment here, that's a suggestion that you're making. So you do understand that there are other provinces actually that are suffering the highest levels of unemployment, far worse than the Western Cape. But what is the point you're trying to make, Clement? You're trying to suggest that we in the Western Cape should put up with 20% unemployment because actually it's worse in the rest of the country because there it's even worse governed than here. We want to be well governed. You know, Limpopo, with the best will in the world, elected the ANC. KZN elected, or now almost MK. The Eastern Cape elected the ANC. So if they're really badly governed because the national government is enacting terrible economic policy, at least they voted for it. Here in the Western Cape, we didn't. We didn't. Well, I'm not suggesting that you have to put up with it. I'm just trying to correct what you're saying so that the viewers don't get the wrong message. When you are creating an impression that you're going to run to the US to engage Trump because you want Cape independence, and one of the issues you are dealing with is the chronic unemployment, the suggestion there is that it is that bad in the Western Cape that it requires another government to intervene. I want the viewers to understand that that's not the case. When you talk about chronic unemployment, that is not in comparison to other countries, to other provinces in the country. And that's similar to the point AfriForum was making about farm murders. Yes, there are farm murders, but the impression they're trying to create is that for some reason white people are under siege, when in fact when you look at the numbers, that is not the case. It's people who live in farms who get killed, who are victims of crime. So I want the viewers to get that. How are you going to move around the Constitution here? Because this doesn't align with our democratic values. We are a democratic society that embraces a singular, non-racial society. So which part of the Constitution, in your understanding, allows for such a cessation from South Africa? Okay, well, first of all, let's just dispel some myths. We're not a non-racial country. We're a deeply racialized country. We've got 142 race laws. We have BEE, we have affirmative action, we have race quotas in sport. We absolutely are not a non-racial country. We're a deeply racialized country. So let's get that absolutely straight to start off. Now, you asked me where in the Constitution do we get this right from? Well, in a number of places. First and foremost, Section 235, the right of self-determination. The right of self-determination for the South African people as a whole does not preclude other groups, so that there you could start. And you can also go to international law. The right of self-determination is a fundamental principle of international law, which South Africa has repeatedly sworn to uphold since 1994, and the ANC ANC are outspoken supporters of self-determination for Palestine, for the Western Sahara. So the ANC support self-determination. The South African Constitution enables self-determination. So if the Western Cape people come along and say we'd like to enact our right to self-determination, what constitutional barrier exists to stop them?
I mean, if you're so confident that the Constitution allows for it, why haven't you gone straight to the Constitutional Court to see that realized? Have you ever tried that?
Well, what would we go to the Constitutional Court for at this point in time? The first thing we need to do is have a referendum to determine the democratic will of the Western Cape people. The Constitutional Court has certified Section 235. I can talk you through the certification. It's a very significant note, but at this point it's irrelevant, because the first step in the process is to establish the democratic will of the Western Cape people, which should happen in a referendum, which the DA promised to call and then went back on their word, which the Constitution allows, and our first port of call is to try and force a referendum on Cape Independence. And actually, that is probably the primary objective that we have going overseas, to raise funding to help us to work towards that referendum and to see if we can get political pressure placed on the Western Cape government to call the referendum, because right now the Western Cape Premier is defeating democracy in the Western Cape by deliberately not calling a referendum that the majority of people in the Western Cape want.
Where in the Constitution, though, does it talk about secession? Because the Constitution, when it talks about the right to self-determination, it doesn't explicitly define, in fact, a single section. I'm not seeing anywhere where it talks about secession. In fact, if anything, it looks at the right of all people to freely determine their political status, to pursue their economic, social, and cultural development. Where in that section of the Constitution do you think your call for secession is justified?
So self-determination is a right that attaches to all people. Secession is the ultimate measure of self-determination. There is no absolute right to independence. There's a right to self-determination, and that becomes context-specific. So what would happen? What would be the legal process here? The Western Cape Premier would call a referendum. If the Western Cape people then vote in favour of Cape independence, the Western Cape Premier or the Western Cape government would then be obliged to negotiate with the South African government for its independence. And then you start to fall into the precedents of international law, which would be the classic precedents would be the Quebec judgment, the ICJ's Kosovo judgment, and the UK Scotland judgment. And there's form there which effectively says both those parties must negotiate in good faith, because the Western Cape people have a right to self-determination, which may be exercised in the form of secession or in other forms. But let's remember, lesser forms would be things like devolution. And so two points on self-determination. First of all, it's an undeniable right. The South African government is prohibited from international law from saying no. You cannot say no to self-determination. And the lowest form of self-determination is autonomy, devolution of powers. Now, here the Western Cape were elected wanting the devolution of police and rail, and the national government is refusing to give the Western Cape devolved powers, even though they've asked for it. So arguably, the national government is already in default of international law by not listening to the Western Cape people. Now, ironically, the Western Cape government isn't pressing this issue. I wish it would. I actually have lobbied long and hard with the Western Cape government to assert the right to self-determination. That's why we wrote the Western Cape People's Bill, because they can claim those things by right. But anyway, that's an aside at this point. We need a referendum. Okay,
cool. We clearly understand that Constitution differently, but I'd leave it there, I feel. Did you, because it always feels to me like you probably, let me ask it this way. Did you contest elections?
Yes, right. Well, so the referendum party contested elections, yes, but we must understand that elections and referendums are very different things. They're both separately in the Constitution because they're completely separate things. So, yes, we did contest elections.
Okay, how much support did you get when you contested?
We contested elections to try and force the Western Cape Premier to call a referendum. We didn't contest the elections to hope to get a majority. That was
I hear that, Phil. I want the listeners to understand. So you contested elections. How much support did you get in the province, and how much support did you get nationally?
So look, so we got about 5,100 votes in the Western Cape, and we got about collectively 7,200 unique votes. Outside of in the national ballot, we got about 4,000 votes. So we didn't get enough votes to force the Western Cape government to call a referendum. So at this point in time, that was our first outing. We were a 6-month-old party, and obviously we'll continue with that. But we're using all the means at our disposal to try and get a referendum in the Western Cape.
You didn't scratch the surface. So in percentage point, let me get the viewers to understand. 0.26% of the provincial vote, 0.02% of the national vote. What does that tell you? So if you are an organization that is premised on Cape independence, this is something that you have spoken about as an organization. When you go campaign, you have to seek and want to appeal to the people who can resonate with your message. What does this support base tell you about your message and whether or not it resonates with people of the Western Cape?
Well, look, I guess here's the question of do you want to know the answer or not? So let me rather go back to you and say, look, what did polling say was going to happen? The overwhelming majority of people in the Western Cape who want Cape independence vote for the DA. That's a fact that's been established in every single poll. So we've got two things that we know from polling. The majority of people in the Western Cape favour a referendum being held. We've had that consistently across all of our polls. And the majority of Cape independence supporters vote for the DA. And what did polling say was going to happen? That all those Cape independence supporters weren't going to vote for us, they were going to vote for the DA. We tried to change that reality, and we didn't. But we can't pretend that they don't exist, that they're just voting for the DA.
But why are they not voting for you? If you're a party that wants to see a referendum, if truly what you're claiming is true, that the majority of people in the Western Cape want to see a referendum, you're a party that advocates for that. Why are they not voting for you? You got 0.2% nationally. You got 0.26% provincially. That's a dismal failure. That's a message to you that that message you claim resonates clearly doesn't.
No, well, clearly, surely you can understand the difference. So first of all, I'll come back to that point. They are separate things in the Constitution. On an election, you vote across a range of issues for who you want to run your province. I don't blame people for thinking, hang on a second, this small, tiny, 6-month-old party isn't the party that's right for running the Western Cape. We tried to get a protest vote. The majority of people voted for the DA because they thought the DA were the party that was best equipped to run the Western Cape. And that's what they voted for. A referendum is something very, very different. That's why in international law, in international norms, independence questions are decided in a single question referendum, which is not party political. It takes party politics out of it. You don't vote across a range of issues. You vote on one specific issue. Do you want Cape independence or not? That's how it works all around the world, and that's how we want it to work here. And when we poll, we poll consistently. Every single time, the majority of people in the Western Cape want a referendum to be held.
And yet they don't vote for the same party that wants the same referendum. Okay, well, what exactly do you want Donald Trump to do?
So we want to get some financial support so that we can run a more comprehensive campaign so that we can be more effective, and we want the US to place diplomatic pressure onto the Western Cape government to say, hey, you're standing in the way of democracy, and we want you to consult the Western Cape people and allow them to express their democratically will freely, as they should be able to do in a democracy.
Well, the President spoke about your citizenship. Just lastly, Phil,
Sure.
You are a permanent resident, right? You're not a citizen yet of this country.
Sure, that's correct, yes.
Is this something that you would do in your birth country of Britain? And how do you respond to people who argue that here's a man who's come from Britain, who's not even a citizen fully of this country yet, and here he is sowing these divisions and wanting to go to another country to claim to represent citizens of this country, and in that process is sowing divisions and wants another government to interfere in our internal affairs?
Well, so as usual, I would say that this is political rhetoric, and I think the fact that the president has chosen to play the man and not the ball speaks volumes. And there's a lot of facts that either he doesn't yet know or he hasn't made clear, including the fact that I'm entitled to citizenship. I'm trying to attain citizenship, and actually I've got a court order which the Department of Home Affairs is in default over. Around my citizenship. So there are a number of issues there which certainly haven't come out to the light. I don't want to get sidetracked onto those issues. One of the things I think is far more important, because it's not about me. In a referendum, it's about 3.2 million voters. So if you focus on me, you've missed the point. But here the president says, why does this person come to South Africa? Well, the departure point is fundamentally wrong. When I came to South Africa and invested all my life's work and wealth in South Africa before I married a South African, had South African children, set up my businesses here. Ultimately, I came here under Thabo and Becky, where we had this really well-run country with strong economic growth, low unemployment, and everything was moving forward. After that, we had Jacob Zuma, we had state capture, we had increases in race-based policy. And so the question should be, what on earth has turned this foreign investor who came here and fell in love with this country, somebody who wants Cape Independence, and perhaps the president should just turn the camera around 180 degrees and start asking himself, what am I doing as the president that's making somebody like this guy suddenly get so determined to fight for this issue for his family and other people's family? How badly have I treated his family to make them want to fight like this?
Have you ever thought of going back to Britain at some point if you are so unhappy about how things are being done here, instead of wanting to push a particular province to somehow stop being part of the larger country of South Africa?
Have you ever thought how racist it is for people to keep saying, why, if you don't like it, leave? I'm here. I'm entitled to be here. My wife is South African. She 10th generation. My children were born here. They don't know any other country. They're Afrikaans speaking. They go to an Afrikaans school. So actually, I find it very offensive when people start saying, as soon as I don't like your political views, have you thought of going home? Have you thought of leaving the country, Clement? If you don't like my views, do you want to leave? And am I saying to you, why don't you leave?
Not at all. So if I don't like this country, if I feel like the province that I am part of, somehow I don't want it being part of a larger South Africa, I am going to consider leaving this country instead of trying to force my opinion on people. And I'll say force, Phil, because there's no evidence that suggests that the people have voted that they want a cessation of the Western Cape from South Africa. Hence the question I'm asking you. I honestly don't mean it in an offensive way. I just want to know, is that not a consideration to you if you're so unhappy here? Now you are wanting people to take a political posture of, let's move away from South Africa, when this is a country that we've built that is non-racial, that lives in a constitutional democracy. And if that doesn't serve you, and if that doesn't serve me, nothing stops us from deciding to pack up and leave.
My family are multi-generation South African. I've become South African. This is our home. We're going nowhere. What we want is I'm not trying to force my views on anybody. Remember, I'm calling for a referendum, and I would say to you, I'm willing to have a referendum and allow the people to decide for themselves. It's the government that doesn't want to ask the people. Let's ask them, and then the matter's solved.
Phil Craig, thank you so much for speaking to us on Facebook.
What do you make of the Western Cape independence charge?
No, it's nonsense. You know, I mean, I understand, perhaps the only understanding I have for it is, you know, if I go back to the earlier question, if I put myself in the shoes of an ANC leader right now, I understand the emotional trauma of the GNU. If I try and put myself in the shoes of a Western Cape independencer, I understand the emotional impulse that says everything I look at in South Africa is going wrong. Why don't we just have our own, you know, here's this place that seems to be generally working. Why don't we just have our own country? But so while I understand that emotion, I do not think that that is even remotely a solution. We are passionate South Africans. We want our country to work. We believe it can work. We believe we have now a chance to start making it work. And the answer is not just to cut off a little portion of it. the answer is to get stuck in and say, we're not going to accept failure. We're not going to accept decline. We're going to do something about it. We're going to win. Firstly, you have to convince the public to support you. We're going to win in growing numbers. We're going to win in more places, and we're going to turn things around. So, no, not my vibe.
That's a wonderfully categorical answer.
Cape Independence Advocacy Group says it intends to send a delegation to the United States. This is where it will raise funds and garner diplomatic support for its campaign to have an independent Western Cape. The group says it has written to President Cyril Ramaphosa as well as the DIRCO minister. Well, let's speak now to Phil Craig, who is with the Cape Independence Advocacy Group. Phil, a good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. You've written to the President, Ronald Lamola, as well as the Western Cape Premier, to say what exactly?
Just to, in the first instance, just to inform them that we're intending to go to the United States and that we're going to lobby there for Cape independence. We've taken legal advice. We've always been an organisation that stayed within the bounds of the Constitution and is pushing for Cape independence democratically, peacefully, and legally. So we're about to go to the US, and the advice we received, and I thought it was sensible advice, is look, let's not do anything underhand. We'll put our cards on the table. We'll be very transparent in what we're doing, and we've written to those, the President, the Premier, and the Minister of DIRCO, and we've said, look, we believe we have the right to do this. We intend to do this, but in the spirit of fair play, we're going to give you that full notice, and we're inviting you to make any representations if you believe that we're not entitled to do this.
Okay, let's talk about this though, because this is intending to go to the White House and travel to Washington, D.C. to advocate for the cessation of the Western Cape?
Well, so to advocate for...
You guys are way too stressed out about Phil Craig wanting to go to the States. This is the same Phil Craig, right, that got one of his subordinates to sell his own personal vehicle to help fund the initiatives of the previous election. This guy, Mohammed Yusuf, he himself admitted to us that he had sold his car to help fund the campaign for the election. So you just know this like and his merry band of fucking losers are going to have to do some real struggles to go get themselves to the States. That's probably why they're announcing it and all that, trying to get as much money for it as possible. But I've realized there's no point in stressing about this. Like, he's a fucking loser.
So I just woke up, and usually I open X to see what is going on in current and political affairs, and I saw this post from Newsroom Africa. The Cape Independence Advocacy Group says it intends to send a delegation to the US where it will raise funds and garner diplomatic support for its campaign to have an independent Western Cape. The group says it has written to President Cyril Ramaphosa, as well as the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation and the Western Cape Premier. Phil Craig, the founder of this, let's call it a movement for now, says that they are within their rights. So I'm going to be honest, I didn't even know that this group exists anymore. And as far as I know, they've actually operated under quite a few names, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I'm just still tired. Why Phil Craig is involved in South African politics astonishes me. He might have the same accent, but I'm actually from South Africa, whilst, he's from the UK. So, anyway.
What the signs say, and they need to prepare that these people who want Western Cape to become an independent state, they must know that it will not happen, because their right-wing coalition will not govern the Western Cape. Their right-wing coalition will not govern South Africa. We are going to govern South Africa, and Western Cape will not be an independent state. They must not try the government of the EFF, because we know what soldiers are used for. And when we are in charge of South Africa and anyone wants to take chances with the Western Cape, that person will meet the might of the state. Because there's no one who's going to turn this province into a colony. This province is part of South Africa. And EFF in Saldanha Bay demonstrated that everything else that is done in South Africa shall be done in the Western Cape, because Western Cape and South Africa is one thing.
So yesterday, a British man by the name of Phil Craig launched a political party called the Referendum Party, right? Now, why am I saying a British man? Because he is British with a British accent. He does, however, have South African citizenship, right? Because you can only register a political party if you have citizenship. Now, in South Africa, like a lot of other countries, you can acquire citizenship in two ways. It's either one, you've been in the country for a specific period of time, or two, you have enough money to invest in the country and start businesses, and then you can acquire citizenship that way. So I don't know how this British man acquired citizenship, so it could be either or. That's one. So the Referendum Party is basically Cape Independence. So a few years ago, the same gentleman, Phil Craig, had pushed the movement for Cape Independence, which was for Cape Town or the Western Cape to become an independent country. So what that means is that I have family in Cape Town, right? And I have family in the Northwest. I have family in the Northern Cape, right? Right now, we are all South African citizens. If they are able to get this going and separate the Western Cape from South Africa, then my family in Cape Town will now have a different nationality, and it will require me to have a passport and apply for a visa in order for me to now go to Cape Town or visit any of my family members in the Western Cape, right? Because they want to have their own country in the Western Cape. Now, a few months ago, in June, I think, the DA had pushed for a specific bill that was similar to Cape Independence, but they did not paint it as Cape Independence. They said that they were looking for the autonomy to rule the Western Cape in a manner that does not allow the ANC government to interfere with certain things. Now, keep in mind that provincial governments actually have a lot of power, right? But if they are a federal state, because they were requesting for an independent state, which is similar to a federal state, it means that they have the say in import, export, trading licenses, whether or not certain people can come into the country. They cannot, there's a lot of things. There's a lot of things that they are able to have a say over, right? And people said no, right? That was the DA. When you go to the DA's website and when you read the DA's manifestos and a lot of what it is that they've been speaking about, they've been pushing towards a federal state as well. Whether or not they structure it in that manner that they're looking for an independent state or a federal state that's not the question. They are looking for that. They just don't know how to say it, right? Because they do have a large enough following that could argue that. So now you've got the Referendum Party and you've got the DA. So what I did is I went on to the Referendum Party's website, and their agenda is one agenda and one only, and that is for the Western Cape to become a country. That's it. That's all they speak about. They speak about how they are going about this. They even say that DA supporters, all they need to do is vote for them, because that vote is as good as a vote for the DA. Now, what that tells me is that these two political parties have formed an alliance. And through that, they are looking to push for the Western Cape's independence.
Black communities also benefit from Cape independence.
Cool.
That question, it's very important. But since that we are advocating for a non-racial Cape independence, I would say the question must be rephrased to say, are the people of the Western Cape going to benefit out of Cape independence? That question would be very relevant. Now, we do not want that there should be now a constant racial classification or racial profiling, because that will now defeat the purpose. What we want is a very non-racial Cape independence, where when we see people, we don't see people on the basis of their race, but we see people as humans than racially classifying such people. So